Hi, church. 2020 was a particularly challenging year for me personally. Because 2020 started out and we were all talking about how 2020 vision, and it was like all this amazing visionary and futuristic look, and we were all enthusiastic, not knowing that there'd be this virus coming from Wuhan in China, and suddenly we'd be locked down by March and April. And I personally struggled with the idea of being locked down and confined. And I struggled with this idea of actually having to just sit there at home by myself and not be able to exercise the freedoms that actually I've been used to. And also, because of the COVID impact on business, and I'm a businessman, that was difficult because suddenly you've got business pressure and you've got a lot of pressure that is just on you. And I really just struggled with it. And when you struggle, actually you've got to sometimes come back and say, well, what matters in my life? What is important? And so therefore, what I'm going to share with you is actually my journey to coming back and saying, well, what matters? What is important here? Because when you're under pressure, your view and your vision tends to get distorted. You get distracted by the here and now. So what I've been on in a journey, not sure I've got it right yet, actually I've stepped back. Let's look at the bigger picture. Let's look at actually how I can help reset myself and what God's word has to say about me resetting myself from a challenging 2020 and a 2021 that's also got some struggles with it. And so what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about measuring. As you can see over here, I've got some instruments. Now, one of the things that were interesting about 2020 is that because we stayed at home or we worked from home, I worked from home, the fridge was easily accessible. So therefore, my ability to use this particular instrument, the kitchen scale, that reduced because we no longer were counting calories. Because here, now we were taking care of ourselves. But the consequence of that is that there's a bathroom scale that gives us numbers, and these are some of the numbers we don't want. And so therefore, they give us feedback. So in life, we spend our lives measuring things, and we measure ourselves. And actually, there's something to this measurement. So, as a start off, let's look at what the Collins Dictionary talks about measuring, the word measure. It's a verb. It says, if you measure the quality, value, or effect of something, you discover or judge how great it is. Just remember that. If you measure the quality, value, or effect of something, you discover or judge how great it is. We'll come back to this a little bit later on. But first of all, we're going to read from Ecclesiastes 1 in the Message, verses 1 to 7. Some very inspirational verses in the Bible. They're very exciting. Let's get on to them. It says, these are the words of Questa, David's son, king in Jerusalem. Smoke, nothing but smoke. That's what the Questa says. There's nothing to anything. It's all smoke. How inspiring is that? What's there to show for a lifetime worth of work? A lifetime of working with your fingers to the bone. One generation goes its way, the next one arrives, but nothing changes. It's business as usual for old planet Earth. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, then it goes it again and again. The same all round. The wind blows south, the wind blows north, around and around and around it blows, blowing this way and then that, the whirling, erratic wind. All the rivers flow to the sea. The sea never fills up. The rivers keep flowing the same old place and then start all over again and do it again. Everything is boring, utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. Boring to the eye, boring to the ear. What will it be again? What happened will happen again. There's nothing new on this earth. Year after year, it's the same old thing. Does someone call out, hey, this is new. Don't get excited. It's the same old story. Nobody remembers what happened yesterday, and the things that will happen tomorrow, nobody will remember them either. And it ends on this inspirational note. Don't count on being remembered. Oh, that's in the Bible. Okay, let's continue with this inspirational verses from Ecclesiastes. This time we go to Ecclesiastes 2, verses 1 to 3, also in the Message. It says, I said to myself, let's go for it. Experiment with pleasure. Have a good time. There's nothing but smoke. What do you think of the fun-filled life? Insane. My verdict on the pursuit of happiness, who needs it? With the help of a bottle of wine and wisdom, and all the wisdom I could muster, I tried my level best to penetrate the absurdity of life. These are key verses now. I wanted to get a handle on anything useful we mortals might do during the years we spend on this earth. Let's capture that again. I wanted to get a handle on anything we mortals might do during the years we spend on this earth. So what's the title of my message? We measure everything in life. We understand what it is to measure. So therefore, how will you measure your life? Now, I'm an avid reader. I love reading. One of the things I love reading biographies. Biographies are fascinating because they're all the same. They have an origin story. Some kid is born somewhere. And then this person goes and endures some hardship. They come up with some brilliant idea. This idea grows into a business. They write this book telling us about this business and how this business grew. We buy these books so we can get inspired and learn lessons of how these businesses grew and how these guys built things. One of the things I realized about reading biographies was that, wait, there's a story at the end which we never pay attention to. After all the business lessons, there's something at the end that I started seeing in common the more I read biographies. And I'm going to share some of these. Remember, my title is, How Will You Measure Your Life? And so therefore, can successful people, can some billionaires that we are all familiar with, teach us anything about measuring our lives? As you can see over here, I've got some of my biographies that I'm going to talk about. We've got the Steve Jobs one, we've got the Phil Knight one, Nike, and we've got a Nelson Mandela one. My mother's got my Warren Buffett one, which is good because Warren Buffett became even richer after the age of 60. And so therefore, my mother's reading that. That bodes well for me. So instead of her retiring, who knows, that gives me hope that, she could be my retirement plan. But let's start with Steve Jobs. It's the guy who came up with Apple. We use the products. We love the products. They're aspirational. They're cool. They're fantastic. I love them. At the end of Steve Jobs' biography, there's an excerpt that I want to read. And it says, after 2 hours, he grew quiet. So I got off the bed and started to leave. Wait, he said. This is Steve Jobs speaking. As he waved me to sit back down. It took a minute or two for him to regain enough energy to talk. I had a lot of trepidation about this project. This is about writing the book. He finally said, referring to his decision to cooperate with this book. I was really worried. Why did you do it? This is now the biographer. Steve Jobs answers and says, I wanted my kids to know me, he said. I wasn't always there for them, and I wanted them to know why and to understand what I did. Okay, found Apple, massive company, Steve Jobs on his deathbed. The end of everything comes down to him saying, I'm writing this book so that my kids will know me and know who I am. There are lessons there. If we go on to the man who founded Nike, $60 billion business, Phil Knight, an amazing book, an amazing story. But again, let's look at the final chapters. It says there, lastly, I wish to thank my family, all of them, but particularly my son, Travis, whose support and friendship meant and mean the world to me. And of course, a full-throated, full-hearted thanks to my Penelope, who waited and waited. She waited while I journeyed. She waited while I got lost. She waited night after night while I made my maddeningly slow way home, usually late, the dinner cold. And she waited the last few years while I relived it all, aloud in my head and on the page. Even though there are parts she didn't care to relive, from the start, going on to half a century, she has waited. And now I can at least hand her these heartfelt pages about them, about Nike, about everything. Penny, I couldn't have done it without you. Okay, $60 billion business. You build it. You tell us about it. An amazing book. And at the end, all he wants to thank is his son and his wife and the price they paid in supporting him. That's what he's grateful for. That's how he's measuring his life. We saw the same thing in Steve Jobs. Now, if you go to Warren Buffett, he's worth $100 billion. So it's almost double what Phil Knight is worth at Nike. What does he have to say? And again, at the end of the biography, it says, Warren had long loved his wife as an ideal. She had been the grounding person who was his connection to the outside world, as well as the glue that held the family together. After her death, she had passed away here. He was never able to look at Susie's photograph without crying, but he did not lapse into years long of depression or commit suicide as Susie suggested he might. Instead, he mourned for about 2 months. He seemed deeply depressed, and then, as most people do, he gradually returned to living his way of life. The bathtub memory went to work for the love of his life, and Susie overcame and overcame the rest. That was the most important relationship he had personally, said Howie. Howie is Warren Buffett's son. No question about it. He depended on it heavily. So there we go. Warren Buffett, again, billionaire, an amazing investor. At the end, it's about his wife. That's how he's measuring his life. We've seen 3 people, billionaires, all it comes down to them measuring the end. We measure them by the billions they have and the businesses they've built. They measure themselves by the people that are closest to them. But let's look at a person with a different kind of success. Nelson Mandela, long walk to freedom. Again, same thing. Now remember, here we don't judge him as a guy who was a billionaire. But if we look ahead and say, what was he saying? At the end of the autobiography, again, Long Walk to Freedom, it says, but my family paid a terrible price, perhaps too dear a price for my commitment. In life, every man has twin obligations. Obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife, to his children. He has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and human society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family, his home, and was forced to live a life apart in a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not, in the beginning, choose to place my people above my family. But in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, as a brother, as a father, as a husband. In that way, my commitment to my people, to the millions of South Africans I would never know or meet, was at the expense of the people I knew best and loved the most. It was as simple as yet as incomprehensible as a moment when a small child asks her father, why can you not be with us? And the father must utter these terrible words. There are other children like you, a great many of them, and then his voice trails off. Nelson Mandela changed South Africa. We measure him and admire him for all that he's done for the country and for his humility, his patience, his reconciliation. He measures himself. Some tinge of regret in there about how he was not able to be present as a husband, as a father, as a son. So, one of the things I've realized in going through this, it's actually not about how you measure your life. What really matters is who will measure your life. Because as we walk around in life, if you think about it, we all measure each other. We measure each other, we measure us. That's why we make compliments. I like them, or I don't like them, or they are selfish, or they are whatever, or they are wonderful, or they are amazing. What are those measurements we're measuring? We're constantly being measured, whether we like it or not. We are constantly measuring and making judgments. And so therefore, it's not really about how you'll measure your life. It is about who will measure your life. And for me, there's a personal story. There's a photo that will probably come up. It's the only photo I have of me and my dad. And me and my dad did not really have a relationship. And one of the things, this is the only photo, I think this was my first birthday, and I remember this photo. So years later, I think I must have been 16, 17, and I remember I heard my father was sick, and I went into hospital. Remember, him and I had an acrimonious relationship. And I remember going to the hospital, standing there, the nurses are busy doing their thing, and the doctors keep coming. And I had something that I wanted to say to him, because I thought, the man's lying in a hospital, and I need to have a conversation. I need to let out what is within, and we need to talk. And I thought, okay, the nurses seem busy and everything. I said bye-bye to him, and I left. Not knowing that the next day, I'll get a phone call. He's gone. And so, the problem with how we will measure our lives is that it's an amazing quote. The trouble is you think you have time. And therein lies the biggest dilemma that we have as humans. And so therefore, if I ask these questions, how do we solve it practically? I watched this wonderful movie actually 2 weeks ago because I'm on this journey. This is my journey, and I'm sharing it vulnerably. The Bucket List, an amazing movie. I know it's complicated in church recommending movies because you never know what's in these movies. But anyway, this one seems to be okay. Let's pretend it's okay. Forgive me if it's not. And at the end of this movie, there's this amazing line and a quote. It says, it's difficult to understand the sum of a person's life. Some people will tell you it's measured by the ones left behind. Some believe it is measured by faith. Some by love. Other folks say it has no meaning at all. Me, I believe you measure yourself by the people who measure themselves by you. I thought, wow, what an amazing quote. So as we start heading towards the end, talk about social distancing. I'm going to touch on something which is probably a little bit prickly, but that's okay. Last year, we learned about social distancing, how we should stay apart from others, usually those that we are close to. But the one thing I really want to talk about is social distancing in the time of social media. Now, as you've seen over here, I've got a scale. If I pick this up, the further I go back, if I press, it's harder to read the lines unless the camera guys zoom. But if they don't zoom, the further you are, the less likely you are to read accurately. So what does that mean? What does it tell you? Distance obscures your ability to measure effectively. What do I mean by that? We spend a lot of time on social media. We get likes, we get all sorts of hearts, we get all of the stuff, and we can measure it, and it excites us. People post, and off they go. Oh, it's amazing. But guess what? Those measurements are from a distance. Those people don't really know you. You saw it in the billionaires. The measure that really matters is the measure of those closest to you. They know you, they know your truth, they know everything about you. I've got 2 little boys. And one of the things I always struggled with was this relationship with my father and who he was. Then I had boys. I had my own kids. Suddenly I realized me looking at the past and blaming somebody who's no longer there to be able to determine, to actually correct their past, actually was having an impact on my ability that these 2 little boys are going to measure me. They're going to judge me from here on. They're not going to say, oh, this is what you didn't get, so therefore, no. They're measuring, and they're close. And you know what? Their measurement matters. I also have a wife. She measures too, and she measures me. And you know what? Unlike the people on social media that might see things they like and don't like, she knows the real bit. I mean, marriage is a fascinating thing because you get this one human being in life that you can just torment with your madness and your craziness and your insecurity. And every single day, they should just stay there. And guess what's better? They get to torment you too. And that's the joy of it all. But you know what? When you're that close to someone, your measurement is accurate. So we've always got to be careful in a world of social media and what we pay attention to and what we put our hearts to and how we measure others and how we allow others to measure us and influence us. Because, as we've seen, distance obscures your ability to measure accurately. And in fact, a few weeks ago, the Facebook group went down. So Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook went down. And guess what happened? Well, we put the devices down and turn to the people who actually really matter and have a conversation. How will you measure your life? So, another quote from a guy, Clayton Christensen, who was a Harvard professor, who wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? It says, in your life, there are going to be constant demands for your time and attention. How are you going to decide for those demands to get resources? The trap most people fall into is to allocate their time to whatever screams the loudest. That's what I was talking about in terms of social media. And their talent to whatever offers them the fastest reward. That's a dangerous way to build strategy. So as we land this, how do we solve it? How do you measure your life? What am I trying to learn to myself as I go back to basics and ask myself the hard questions? The first one is a verse from Luke 14, verses 28. It's called, begin with the end in mind. You are here today. And so therefore, what do you want the end to look like? There's this verse that says, suppose you want to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost and see if you have enough money to complete it? In fact, there's an exercise that I'm going to touch on briefly that I got from a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is an amazing exercise. It is hard work, and I'd recommend you do it. But I'm going to read what this exercise is. It's called the funeral exercise. Sounds a bit somber, but this focuses you on what really matters in life. It says, in your mind's eye, see yourself going to a funeral parlor or chapel, parking the car and getting out. As you walk in the building, you notice the flowers, the soft organ music, you see the faces of friends and family pass along the way. You feel the shared sorrow of losing, the joy of having known that radiates from the hearts of the people there. As you walk into the front, you look inside the casket, you suddenly come to face with yourself. This is your funeral. 3 years from today, all the people have come to honor and express their feelings of love and appreciation for your life. As you take a seat and wait for the services to begin, you look at the program at hand. There are 4 speakers. The first one is from your immediate family, your children, brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, aunts, uncles, etc. The second speaker is one of your friends, someone who can give a sense of who you were as a person. The third speaker is from your work or profession. And the fourth is from your church or some community organization you were invested in. And this is what's hard about this exercise. Because it says, now think deeply. What would you want each of these speakers to say about you and your life? What kind of a husband, wife, father, mother, what would you want their words to reflect? What kind of a son, a daughter, a cousin? What kind of a friend? What kind of a working associate? Because one day, guys, the sadness about this season that we've had with Corona is that actually it has been filled with a lot of sadness and a lot of loss. And we all get to a point where we can no longer defend ourselves, where our lives get measured, but we cannot have any words to say this is how they were. So therefore, you begin with an end in mind. You've got to say, what do I want them to say? That'll bring you closest to your truest values and bring it back. We saw it with the billionaires. We saw them saying at the end, actually, it was all just about this 1 or 2 people. And that's it. We measure them by the money they make and the businesses they build. They measure themselves by how the people closest to them love them. The second bit is grant and receive the gift of forgiveness. Again, Matthew 6 verse 12, forgive us the wrongs we have done as we ourselves release forgiveness to those who have wronged us. One of the things that get to us as people is that actually sometimes we get injured, we get hurt. One of the biggest things we can do is let go. Just like I said, but my father, it occurred to me when my son was born that I could never blame this man for anything that had been because he was not there to defend himself. But at that point in time, I had a little boy who was going to measure me. And how would he measure me? And what kind of a father would he find me to be? What kind of a husband would he find me to be to his mother? You've got to forgive, though. And remember, you don't have as much time as you think you have. But grant and receive the gift of forgiveness. At the end, relationships are the ultimate prize. Ecclesiastes 4, we return to this inspirational verse where we started. Verses 9 to 12 in the NIV. It says, 2 are better than 1 because they can have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can you keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord with 3 strands. Again, it's simple. We read the billionaires, we read Mandela. We looked at the end, an amazing story. We admire the life, we admire what people have built, we admire all of these things. But at the end, they measure themselves by those closest to them and the relationships they've cultivated and how they've sown into that. A few weeks ago, Phil spoke about independence is overrated. That's actually what this verse is saying. So I say the hashtag independence is overrated. And at the very end, again, we close with Ecclesiastes. Life is short. How will you measure your life? Who will measure your life? I find this very challenging because you've got to live intentionally. Otherwise, you're going to be blown around by the swings and ebbs of life. And I love this verse because it says, Ecclesiastes 5, verses 18 to 20 in the Message, making the most of what God gives. After looking at the way things are on earth, here's what I've decided the best way to live. Take care of yourself, have a good time, and make the most of whatever job you have for as long as God gives you life. And that's about it. Thank you, church, for sharing my personal journey with me. Tough questions, tough conversations, tough reality. Because whenever we live in this world, and we've had just an awesome men's conference, as men particularly, we love to measure things. But are we measuring the right things? Seeing the people that we admire, we measure their businesses, we measure their success, we admire them for that. But at the end, every single one of them measures themselves by who measured them and the people closest to them. I hope that from this message, we'll take it and we'll go forward and think very clearly about actually what really matters and what doesn't. It's been a tough season. It's a good time to reset and reflect. How will you measure your life? Who will measure your life? Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic message by Sibo Nxumalo. I just love hearing from him. He's got so much wisdom, so much that I love about him as a man, as a father, as a husband, and, someone who is just so committed to the vision of our church and, asking questions about the measure of our life. What matters? How do we measure our life? And the questions that he poses for us there, I think, are so good for us to reflect upon. So I pray that you will do that. Particularly, I want to say to all the men, we've just had this fantastic men's gathering, men's conference, men's weekend. I want to encourage all the men to really take on board what Sibo's saying. But it's for all of us, guys, girls, whoever, wherever you're at in life. I think those words are so wise and so helpful for us as we plan our lives and ask God for wisdom in all these different areas. But hey, as we conclude the service, I'd love to take time to pray for people. I want to pray for those who say, you know what, Phil, I've been away from God. I'm loving what I'm hearing. I'm loving being part of all of this, but I know there's distance between me and God, and I don't want to live like that anymore. I want to know God. I want to walk with God. I want to know His plan and His purpose for my life. As Sibo talked about, understanding what matters in life, and one of those really important areas is our spiritual life, our connection, our relationship with God. And you can make that right today with a simple prayer. And I'd love to pray that with people at every location or online. Those you're listening, you're joining with us today, and you're saying, that's me. I need to make my peace with God. Well, I'm going to pray a prayer right now. And if that's you, then I want you to pray this simple prayer with me. And just believe as you pray that prayer that God is really beginning to work in your heart, to forgive you, to walk closely with you. And I believe that's the power of this prayer moment right now. It's the beginning of something brand new for you. So come on, let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your Son, Jesus. Thank you for everything He's done for me. And right now, I open my heart and my life, everything I am, and I give it to you. I thank you from this moment. I am forgiven. I'm a child of God. I'm leaving the past behind, and I'm walking forward into my future with Jesus as my Lord, as my Savior, as my friend. Well, if you prayed that prayer today, man, that is so powerful, so significant. And like I say, it's the beginning, I believe, of a brand new relationship with God. And we'd love to give you something because we believe in that decision so much. We want to help you to grow in your walk with God, in your relationship with Him. We have these beautiful good news guides, and they're available at every location. People will have them as you leave. You can grab one of those. If you're joining us online, we also want to give you one of these. So you can click on the link saying, I made a decision for Jesus. You can click on that and we will send you one of these electronically. And what it is, it's 21-page devotional. And we just encourage you to read one page a day for the next 21 days and allow this to help you to grow in your understanding of what it means to walk with God. There's Bible verses in there. There's just helpful information on what it means to really know Jesus, on the power of the Holy Spirit's work in our life, on so many different aspects of this spiritual journey that we're all on together. So I'd encourage you to grab hold of that as a next step. Let us know. Click on the link. Tell us, hey, today I prayed that prayer. I made that decision. Or if you're at one of our locations, grab one of these as you leave. We'd be more than happy to give you one of these and pray with you, help you however we can. But hey, guys, been so so good being with you in church today. We've got our sisterhood gathering coming up in November. We look forward to seeing you at that. Plus, we have a global heart and soul night happening as well with Pastor Brian and Bobby. And that's going to be on November 16. And so check that out. Make sure you got all the information about that and you know about it. That is for all those who are volunteers, who are leaders, who are helping in any aspect, people who are saying, we're carrying the vision with you. We are having a global, Hillsong Global Heart and Soul Night where we're going to hear from Pastor Brian and Bobby November 16. It's going to be fantastic. So put that in your calendar as well. God bless you. Have a great day. Have a great week. So glad you're with us today for Church Hillsong Africa. We love you.